Hey everyone, this is Mike Fitz, a resident naturalist with Explore.org. Glad you're here this evening. Please stand by. In just a few minutes at the top of the hour, I'll host our next play-by-play broadcast to talk about the bear and salmon activity that we see live on the webcams at Brooks River in Katmai National Park. It'll begin at the top of the hour, so please stand by. I'll be with you in just a few minutes. Well, hello everyone, welcome to Bear Cam in this Bear Cam play-by-play brought to you by Explore.org and Katmai National Park. I'm your host this evening. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm the resident naturalist with Explore.org and also a former park ranger at Katmai National Park in Alaska. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to continue to share my knowledge and love of Brooks River and its bears and salmon with everyone around the world. This is, like I mentioned before, a play-by-play broadcast. So it's a live broadcast. I'm not physically at Brooks River right now, so I'm watching through the webcams like you are at home. But we don't know what we're going to see on these broadcasts, what necessarily we're going to talk about moment to moment. So if there are pauses, for example, when I'm not saying anything, that's okay. That's just me gathering my thoughts. I'm not only the on-air talent, so to speak, or at least the narrator, but I'm also producing the different scenes that we'll see. So we'll be cutting to different scenes downriver. We'll be up at the falls a lot this evening. We'll also be looking at this family and other bears on the River Watch camera. And then I also plan to go underwater from time to time, talk about the salmon and what has been going on under the river's surface. A really spectacular scene underwater right now. Before we get into the main part of the broadcast, however, I always anticipate having a few new viewers joining us. So let's take a quick tour of Brooks River and Katmai. Brooks River is located about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska, in the west central portion of Katmai National Park. The river is about a mile and a half long, and it's bisected by Brooks Falls. And along with our webcam partner, the National Park Service, Explore.org hosts and maintains several webcams along Brooks River. The signal from those webcams is sent wirelessly to 2 radio repeaters on Dumpling Mountain, and then those repeaters send the signal to the small town of king salmon about 30 miles away. Taking a look down at the river itself, again, we're going to focus on the Brooks Falls camera on the left side of the screen. We're also going to take a look at the river watch towards the river mouth, and then that underwater camera that's mounted to the bridge over Brooks River. I do have several questions that I have lined up that I'm going to perhaps have the opportunity to answer during the broadcast. These questions were submitted in advance through the Ask Your Bear Cam question. You can find a link to that if you expand the featured comment below the live camera feed in the thumbnails towards the bottom of the page. So look below the live camera feed for that. And then also in that featured comment, you can find links to donate to the Otis Fund. This is a matching fund with the Katmai Conservancy, which is a friends group for Katmai National Park, and Explore.org is matching funds up to $100,000. And so far, everyone has been extremely generous and donated about $88,000 to the Otis Fund so far. So really incredible outpouring of support for Katmai and its bears. So if you have that opportunity, take a look and donate a few dollars to the Otis Fund. Otis was on the camera earlier today. He's not here right now. Maybe he'll show up for the broadcast, but we are looking at a couple of adult males at Brooks Falls. It looks like number 812, who is a young adult male, just kind of reaching adult age this year. He was born in 2015. And the bear in the background could be, I'm not really sure, is a larger adult male, maybe 474 or number 115, but I'm not positive on that. Maybe we'll get a better look at that bear later on in the broadcast. I have a couple of wonderful camera operators that are helping to drive the cameras and give us these different views. So they're going to be paying attention to what's going on at the river and giving me a heads up on some of the things that they're seeing in advance. Brooks Falls is, or can be, a rewarding spot for bears to fish at this time of the year. There are still a few salmon that are maybe seeking the best spawning site downstream of the falls, and they can get confused in the shallow areas in the far pool, and that's where they're vulnerable to bears. So bears up at the falls right now are really looking for fresher fish than what they might be able to find downstream. Downstream, it's a different scene for a couple of different reasons. One of them is that the bears aren't looking for really live salmon. They're looking for anything that can't swim away. And this spot right here has been extremely popular with bears as we look at our River Watch camera over really the last month and a half, if not more. We even saw a lot of bears hanging out in this vicinity in midsummer, scavenging dead and dying salmon. Right now we're looking at a family of bears. This is number 273 and her 3 yearlings. So 273 has been diving frequently right in this spot. You can see that these bears are all surrounded by an armada of gulls that are looking to pick up scraps. And then also the gulls are bobbing into the water frequently. You'll see them dipping their heads into the water. They're also picking up salmon eggs. And if we go downstream even further from this camera's position and look at the underwater camera, when you're watching the gravel on the underwater camera, you can see that there are salmon eggs drifting through the water and just sitting on the gravel surface. Look for small pink pearls that are drifting through the water. They're going to be pretty tiny. Salmon eggs are really only about the size of a pea, a garden pea, to give you an idea of what they look like. But I've been seeing salmon eggs drifting in the current on the underwater camera, and especially sort of caught in a small eddy on the lower left corner of this view. So there's plenty of free eggs in the water. Those eggs that are drifting free, that are not in a nest, a gravel nest, and buried by the female, those eggs are not likely to survive. They're very susceptible to mechanical shock or damage and bruising as they get thrown through the current and knock against rocks or the river bottom. So they're unlikely to survive. Fungus can easily kill them. but they're a very valuable energy source for the fish in the water and also the birds that have the ability to dive and pick them up from the river bottom. And then there's also a partly eaten salmon on the lower right part of the screen, just like half of a salmon body and dismembered part of the fish. And that's typical of the river bottom at this time of the year. So bears are really looking for anything in the lower river that can't swim away. And as pickings get slimmer, as more salmon spawn and they die and there are fewer fish to scavenge on the river bottom, bears are going to start to pick up some of those partly eaten salmon carcasses and investigate them even more. So if that one doesn't drift away on the lower right-hand side of the screen, I anticipate that a bear will eventually pick it up and examine it, toss it to a different location if it's not worth eating. Salmon at this time of the year are probably about half as caloric from a bear's perspective as they were when they first arrived in July. When salmon arrive in July, they look completely different than what they do right now. They are silver in color. They don't have the red backs, green heads that we're seeing right now. So they undergo a really remarkable transition from midsummer to their spawning regalia right now. But one remarkable thing about these fish is that they stop eating. They cease feeding once they re-enter fresh water. So these fish that have arrived here, really, they arrived in July. They haven't eaten since that time. So they're really fueling their migration and spawning efforts solely through the energy stored within their bodies. And over time, there's just going to be less calories in those fish for a bear, less digestible energy, less fat reserves, less protein reserves. Bears that are up at the falls, they may be looking for some of those more energetic fish, some of the fresher fish. They're going to, if they can catch one up here, it may give them a greater energetic reward than scavenging those dead and dying salmon downriver. But bears up at the falls have to be a lot more patient than the fish, that compared to the bears downstream, like this family group, like 273 and her family, that can pick up dead and dying salmon and scavenge dozens of fish per day very easily down in the lower river. So it's a trade-off for each one of these bears. The bears in the lower river right now, 273 and her family, they're not, getting the most energetic fish on the river, but they're not working very hard for it, and they're finding a lot of those dead fish. The bears up at the falls right now, as you can see, aren't working very hard right now either. They're just sitting there waiting for salmon to swim in front of their faces. So they might not catch as many salmon, but if they do catch a salmon, it's going to have more energy content. It's going to provide more energy to those bears. Taking a slightly different view upriver right now. This is where the water from Brooks Falls comes from. So if you're wondering, which way the water is flowing as we're looking at a Riverwatch camera, it's flowing towards the camera right now. And this is the scene that we're looking at right now is maybe, several hundred yards downstream of Brooks Falls. Again, Brooks Falls is only about a mile and a half long, and Brooks River is only about a mile and a half long, and the falls is only about halfway along the river. So we're no more, really, as the water flows about 3/4 of a mile downstream of the falls. It's common for many bears to be moving through this area, again, looking for anything that can't swim away. The number of birds on the river right now really has been quite incredible to see for this time of the year. We've had, I think, more gulls on the river than I can ever remember seeing within my experience at Brooks River. And that just is a reflection of the availability of food right now, tied to the very large salmon run that this area experienced this year. Like the bears, many of the birds are going to start to disperse from this area very soon, going to their wintertime habitats. The bears are going to be diving into their dens, The birds are going to be flying to open water areas along the shores of the Bering Sea and Bristol Bay, or especially the Pacific for a lot of these gulls. And a great view of Dumpling Mountain right now. Dumpling Mountain is at its summit. We can't see the summit from the webcams, but it's about 2,440 feet in elevation at its summit. Looking at Dumpling right now is a good opportunity, however, to maybe talk about where bears tend to go when they wander to their dens. And I know that that's a question that a lot of people are wondering at this time of the year. Where do the bears go to hibernate, for instance, and what qualities really make a good den? So I'm going to try to pull up a photo here, if I can find it, of our of a den up on Dumpling Mountain. So here we are. So this is a den on the opposite side of Dumpling Mountain that I found several years ago. Bears prefer this type of habitat to excavate their dens. They are not known in Katmai to use caves or rock crevices or anything like that. So they basically dig a hole in a steep hillside in a place that's well vegetated and typically collects a lot of snow. The insides of the dens that I've seen really don't have anything inside them, nothing like to line the bottom of the den, for instance. In other places in North America, biologists have documented bears dragging in maybe evergreen boughs from spruce or pines or something like that. I found any evidence of that happening in Katmai. Usually the dens are just bare dirt floors. But the steep slopes, make it easier for the bears to dig straight into the hillside instead of having to dig down. The amount of vegetation around the den helps to stabilize the den over the winter. So all of those, the roots over top of it help to stabilize the shape of the den overall. And then they love to build their dens at elevations that collect and hold a lot of snow. The snow helps to insulate the den in the wintertime. So the bears are really looking for a Goldilocks set of conditions. And some of the bears from Brooks River probably go up to Dumpling Mountain to den. Most likely, though, they're going to be traveling to other mountains in the near vicinity. So anywhere from Dumpling Mountain, which good denning habitat up there within really a mile and a half of the river, to several miles here with the abundance of salmon available to bears. There's been less of that competition. People often wonder, though, since I'm on the topic of hibernation and denning, do bears compete for denning sites? In fact, that was a question that was submitted through our Bear Camp question forum. Hazel actually asked, is there competition for primo den sites? And there really isn't. So again, when you're up on a place like Dumpling Mountain, there's good denning habitat all over. So bears show fidelity towards their denning areas. They may not go to the exact same spot, but they may go back to within a few hundred meters or a few kilometers of their previous den site once they sort of have established their home range as adults. But there's really no need to compete for denning sites because this sort of habitat is extremely common throughout Katmai National Park. So if you're wondering, will a bear end up usurping a den site from another bear like they might a fishing spot at Brooks Falls? It's not really something that they need to do just because denning habitat is not a limiting resource in their lives. Another bear joining the scene right now at Brooks Falls on the lip of the falls, perhaps looking to navigate the Kwaahu pool. This is definitely a younger and a smaller bear compared to the adults that we were looking at before. Younger and smaller bears have to use caution when they're navigating the areas around larger adults. Larger adults certainly are a physical threat, not only to food resources, or for food resources, but also a physical threat from a bodily sense. But bears are very good at recognizing which bears are may be tolerant, and allow them to approach closer, which ones are intolerant. They live within a hierarchy, and that allows them to partition resources in a way where they can avoid resorting to physical conflict as much as possible. Although we know that they fight, we see it on the cameras. Most often bears will settle their disputes without coming to physical blows. And I'll be watching the falls camera and the other camera downstream where we can see the bears right now for any of those interactions and try to interpret those for you. I wanted to come down to the lower river camera here, or excuse me, the river watch camera quickly. You can see that plume of mud, in the water. That bank where that plume is coming from, the bears have been digging there frequently over the last month or so, and actually excavating a bit of clay. The clay is a weathered volcanic ash from the 1912 eruption of Nova Rupta volcano. It was the fifth largest eruption in recorded history and the largest eruption of the 20th century. It was about 30 times, or it ejected about 30 times more ash and pumice and lava than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. So to give you an idea of its scale, it was a very large volcanic eruption, about a 1,000-year event on the Alaska Peninsula. And about 6 inches or so, 8 inches or so of ash fell in the Brooks River area. And bears actually have been excavating frequently at this time of the year to eat it. And that's a behavior called geophagy. Basically means earth eating or earth hunger. No one's exactly sure why bears might eat soil, but it's been documented to happen in other ecosystems as well. And some people suspect that maybe there's some sort of mineral imbalance that the bears are looking to correct by eating some soil. But other people, and I think maybe this idea is a bit more plausible, at least in the Katmai region, is that the volcanic ash and the clay that it forms after it weathers has some anti-diarrheal properties. When bears are eating a diet of raw salmon, their stool is pretty runny. Their scat is really runny. So it may help, it may be like Ammonium AD or something like that for them at this time of the year. This is a different family, though, than we were looking at before. There are two mother bears with single spring cubs that have been using the river at this time of the year. They're numbered 806 and number 811. I'm not sure which one this is, but that we were looking at 273 and her yearling cubs, which are in their second summer. This is a mother bear with a single spring cub. And so this cub is in its first year. Spring cubs may look small compared to the mothers at this time of the year, but they've grown an exceptional amount in the past 9 months or so. And this cub's only about 9 months old. Bears are born in the winter, in the middle of winter, inside the den, and so right around the end of January, early February is when most brown bears in North America are born. And when bear cubs are born, they're only about 1 pound. But right now, the spring cubs that we see walking around and swimming in the river can weigh around 65 or 70 pounds. So the growth rate over that first year of time is really quite exceptional. We still tend to think of them as small bears, but they're not. I mean, certainly if you were face-to-face with a spring cub, and there is an interesting video swirling around the internet of a ranger hazing 435 Holly's spring cub away from some of the buildings at Brooks Lodge, which is just to the north of this camera. You get a good idea of just how big the spring cubs are at this time of the year. Looks like the mother bear here is going to retrieve her spring cub. We couldn't really see what was happening Looks like the spring cub just didn't want to join maybe mother on the far side of the river, so she came back to it. Mothers are very attentive to their cubs' needs. Curiously, though, just a few days ago, if this is 806, and again, I'm not positive it is, but her spring cub actually got confused about where mother was in this spot right here. There was another family, 273, and her cubs nearby, and her cub got a little confused about which one was her mom, and the cub ended up approaching the wrong mother, and that ended up causing a fight between 806 and 273. It doesn't look like the bears are any worse for wear, at least from what we can see on the cameras. Cubs are generally, really good at sticking with mom, but every once in a while, if they're not paying attention, they look one way, not see where mom went, and then take a look at another bear and think, hey, well, maybe that is mom. And I saw that once before upstream near Brooks Falls in the Riffles area. And there was no harm to the cub done in that instance either, but the cub was quite shocked once I realized I was looking at or approaching the wrong bear overall. This cub will probably have at least one more year with its mother. It'll go to the den with mom. This winter, spend another summer with mother as a yearling and go to den as a 2-year-old with mom, and then it may separate from mother at the beginning of its third summer. That'll with 273, who we were looking at earlier. She typically keeps her cubs only for 2 full summers before separating from them. I'm going to transition up at the falls here because we're looking at a different view. At the moment, we're looking downstream from Brooks Falls. Again, the view that we were looking at before is kind of just around the bend where the river disappears out of sight. At the center left portion of your screen, one bear sitting on a rock. This could be maybe number 907 or 908. Young bear, either one is a young bear from the same litter, and resembles their number 708 Amelia very closely. And this is a thing that Amelia did somewhat frequently. She would sit on rocks just like this same rock actually. Maybe just for comfort. I mean, the water is cold at this time of the year. It's probably in the 50s at most. So maybe perching on a rock like this allows them to be just a little bit more comfortable, even though bears are very tolerant of cold water, well adapted for it. I have no doubt that they feel the coldness of the water on their feet. But also sitting on a rock like this, elevates you slightly above the water surface compared to if you were standing in the water. So it may be easier to see salmon in the water right down below you. When we were talking about family groups earlier, we were looking at the mother with her single spring cub. Just a moment ago, we saw 273 and her cubs earlier in the broadcast. Cubs learn an awful lot from their mothers, and I can't help but wonder whether or not this bear picked up this habit of sitting on rocks from Amelia, from its mother. Presuming I have the identification of this bear correct, and I could be wrong. Sometimes it's a little hard to identify bears, through the webcams. But yeah, this bear does look, to me at least, an awful lot like number 708. Sort of same colored ears, same shaped ears, same habits, sitting on that rock. But sometimes we do see physical features in bears that are passed on from generation, for instance. that was a sort of a related question that came through our bear camp question form. Kathy asked, why are there color variations in the fur of bears? And just like in humans, it's genetically controlled. So some bears are just genetically predisposed to have lighter colored fur, for instance, or perhaps different claw color. We do see that some bears have very light colored ears. And I think that the fur color on their ears in particular could be passed down from mother to cub or father to cub. Male bears play no role in raising cubs, however, so we don't really know specifically if, or it's harder to see, resemblance from a father to a cub, just because we don't really know who sires the offspring in most cases. Really, the only way to confirm that is through genetic analysis, and there's just been very, very limited genetic analysis done of the Rivers bears currently, although there is a project to try to tease some more of those details out going on currently, and hopefully we'll have some more results or have some more info on that in the near future. But right now, yeah, when you're looking at a bear, really you can only kind of trace those physical features down through from mother to cub, just because we don't really know the paternal relationships. Paternal relationships, as to say, not paternal, as in both parents. Let's head back down river for the moment. Take a look at a few more bears that are scavenging in the lower river area. Again, this is an extremely productive area to fish at this time of the year. As long as you're willing to eat dead and dying salmon, which bears are not shy about eating carrion. Plenty of birds, waiting to take the opportunity to scavenge any leftovers that bears leave behind. We talked about them maybe bobbing for salmon eggs earlier. And when we think of opportunity with the bears and the birds, I think it's maybe important to think about how bears are able to take advantage of opportunities that are seldom presented to them. We can, head back up to Brooks Falls just real quickly, because just as I cut away, a bear found a salmon just drifting. The bear that we were looking at before on the rock found a salmon drifting right down in front of it. It's able to pick it up, a very easy meal for it. So sitting there on a rock, it may seem kind of lazy from our perspective. Sitting in the far pool of Brooks Falls, like 812 and the other adult male that we saw earlier in the broadcast we're doing, it may seem lazy, but really it's an effective strategy to gain calories when your food can come to you. And again, remember that the currency that bears live by, their money essentially is calories. They don't exchange it with one another. They basically are just trying to gain as much of it from the environment as possible before they go into their dens. And they need to eat a year's worth during their active season, which is often fewer than 6 months for many of these bears. So they need to make a huge reward, a huge profit in calories before they go into their den. So sitting on a rock, sitting in the river, slowly swimming through the river, looking for anything that can't swim away, is just a great way to do that. We'll take a look downriver here. You can see that light-colored line under the water. It's disappearing out of our view on the right-hand side, but that's the clay, the ash from the 1912 eruption of Nova Erupta volcano. Now we're looking slightly downstream. The river has a sharp S-bend here. And this is, again, an area where bears really can just sit and wait for salmon, dead and dying salmon, to drift to them. I modified this map a few weeks ago from a map that I had found in some training documents that I gained from when I was a ranger several years ago at Katmai, and the dark gray areas represent areas where salmon tend to collect. Dead and dying salmon tend to collect at this time of the year. So when you're watching the river watch camera, which is marked by that star, when that camera is panning along the river, you can easily see where bears are congregating and figure out why, because all these eddies and side channels are places where the salmon tend to collect and where bears are going to frequent most often. So real easy for bears just to sit in the water right here, wait for salmon to come to them. We were talking about opportunity with the bears earlier. Birds are opportunists. Again, they're going to be looking for any scraps that the bears leave behind. But we've seen a bear in this location, not this one in particular, I don't believe, but we've seen a bear in this location actually hunting gulls. And it could be this bear. I mean, it looks similar to a video that I'm going to show you in just a little bit. You know, people often ask, do the bears ever chase the birds? Do they ever eat the birds? Why are they ignoring the birds? Why don't they go after the birds? And the birds are really quick. They're generally pretty what bears are doing. A bird is not an easy meal like a dead salmon is. So bears are, usually pretty good at knowing, hey, it's just not worth the effort. The bird is probably going to get away. Maybe I'll chase it for fun, but it's doubtful that I'll be able to catch it. They're just too quick. They can fly away. So even if I can run maybe faster than a bird, they can fly a lot faster than I can run. They can jump up into the air out of reach very easily. So bears are good at knowing that. Over time, the gulls have been habituated to the presence of bears. They seem to learn that the bears really don't pose much of a threat, but that's not the case 100% of the time. Just let me show you this video here that was just from a few days ago, a bear charging into a flock of gulls. This is the same spot that we're looking at live on the cameras. And that bear was successfully able to charge into a flock of gulls and pick up a gull and take it to the island and consume it. Start that, or I'll replay that for you one more time in case you want to see that. One more time here. Let me play that for you here. So this was a surprise to me. Most of the time I've seen bears playfully run at bears, but not really making any serious attempt to actually catch a bird. But it did, this one at least. And we saw this bear trying this again that same day and earlier today as well. It found success in this spot, just off this island upstream of the River Watch camera. So again, bears are opportunists. There were a few factors that I think led to the bear's success in this location. That happened to be the fact that the gulls were all sort of bunched together in a real tight group as they were bobbing for salmon eggs. The gulls were facing the opposite direction from the bear. And then also the bear was, the gulls weren't expecting that surprise attack from the bear. The gulls have just gotten really, really used to the fact that the bears typically ignore them. So they were sort of lulled into that sense of complacency. And a few of them paid the price for that. We still see, the gulls in this area, really close to a lot of these bears. So, not all of them have, learned that lesson. They still are, maybe taking the risk of being close to a bear instead of, avoiding it. But really, it's only been one bear that's been successful in this instance. It will be interesting to see, maybe next summer if the bear comes back and if we have fewer gulls on the river, if it tries that same strategy again. It does highlight, though, that bears are opportunists. They are omnivores. They're basically going to try to eat anything that they can. That's going to provide them with digestible energy. They could eat the grass right now, but it's really not going to provide them with any calories or nutrition. So they ignore that. But if they can pounce on a bird and change up their diet a little bit, maybe try for some fresher meat, then they're certainly going to do that. back up at the falls, still a few bears in our line of sight. That plunge pool right in front of the bear closest to the camera is it can be a very productive spot when the salmon are migrating through the river. But at this time of the year, I think this spot that we call the jacuzzi is becoming less productive. We're just not seeing a lot of bears paying much attention to it, although they still will go into it from time to time. But a lack of attention paid to the jacuzzi right now suggests to me that there's just not a whole lot of salmon sort of swirling in that spot, looking to go beyond Brooks Falls. For younger bears, though, that maybe want to take the chance to practice in the jacuzzi, this is a good time to do that. In July, during years when there are fewer salmon in the river, the jacuzzi is a very sought-after fishing spot for the large adult males. So younger bears at that time of the year typically don't have a really good opportunity to fish in that location. But again, another example of how bears are opportunists. They will look for open fishing spots. They can learn from watching other bears. We certainly see that happen. Mother bears very rarely, I mean really rarely, will ever go into the jacuzzi and fish while they're caring for cubs. So bears that fish a jacuzzi really aren't learning it from their mothers. They're typically learning it from watching other bears. And we're more than halfway through our broadcast right now, so if you joined us a little bit late, I'd like to welcome you to Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm the resident naturalist with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger at Katmai National Park. So thanks to Katmai and thanks to Explore.org for giving me this opportunity to continue to talk about bears and salmon with everybody. And I'll be with you till the top of the hour, so 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. Another really healthy looking bear downstream right now, moving through the water slowly, perhaps looking for salmon. I haven't seen a bear on the river this year that looks like it hasn't had enough to eat. Salmon run this year was so exceptional, with more than 4 million salmon returning to the Naknek River watershed, and maybe about 800,000 salmon swimming through Brooks River this year, and many tens of thousands of salmon spawning in Brooks River. It's just really an amazing year for salmon and to be a bear at Brooks River. So if you're just kind of lucky enough to be around the river at this time of the year, you were rewarded with a lot of food. So even though this bear right here is fairly small overall, it doesn't have the skeletal size to carry the same body mass as the large adult males. It's still well equipped to survive winter hibernation. When we see the very large adults at the river, bears like 747, like Otis, like Holly, like Grazer, like 856, some of the larger adults, males and females on the river, they sort of skew our perspective into what a fat bear can look like, but they really do set the curve. A bear like this would be more typically fat for an ecosystem where they don't have access to concentrated high-calorie food sources as easily as bears in Katmai do. Salmon are the most important food for most of the bears in central Katmai National Park, and that's why they grow so large. This bear here maybe only weighs a few hundred pounds, and I say only, but that can be the full-grown size for reproducing adult females in the Rocky Mountains, for instance, when you're looking at grizzly bears. So when you have more food, you can grow a lot bigger. And the younger bears in Katmai that are just a few years old can actually rival the full-grown adults in size that you find in some of these ecosystems, like in the Rocky Mountains, where bears are fattening up primarily on berries, for instance, in the fall. And of course, we have to thank the salmon for that. So we haven't gone underwater much during the broadcast, so we'll maybe try to spend a few minutes here looking at these fish. Sockeye salmon are the most abundant salmon species in Brooks River. They outnumber other salmon species by, at least two, maybe 1 to 2 orders of magnitude. Every year, several 100,000 sockeye salmon utilize Brooks River either for migration or spawning or both. And we've been seeing a lot of spawning activity on the underwater camera, again, which is located attached to the bridge near where the Riverwatch camera is streaming from right now. And that's not something that we typically see in this area of the river. It's possible that the river changed this year and the spawning conditions in this part of Brooks River, the lower, the very, very lower part of Brooks River, became more conducive and provided, better spawning conditions for salmon. Or it's possible that the density and the competition for spawning sites upstream maybe forced some fish down into this area. I'm not really sure, but we have seen a lot of salmon digging nests in this area, competing for nesting sites, competing for mates. There's definitely a lot of male salmon in this frame right now. Male salmon have more exaggerated hooked jaws at this time of the year, and that's called a kite on them, that K-Y-P-E. They also have a more exaggerated hump compared to the females.
Why do I think it's ruined?
A big fan of gravel towards the camera just a little bit ago, probably from a female fanning the gravel, digging in the depression that she'll utilize for her nest. And so a couple beat up females on the right side of the screen there. One in particular, sort of like the center right part of the screen. You can see just how worn she is with that yellowed tail, spots of fungus beginning to form on her skin. That's a triumphant female. That is one that has done her work. She's probably already spawned, and she's just waiting for the moment where her energy completely gives out and she dies in the bottom of the river, drifts down out to the river mouth to be collected by a hungry bear. It's really amazing the sacrifice that salmon undergo in order to reproduce. I mean, they are sacrificing their lives to do it. There's no return to the ocean for these fish. Salmon are born in fresh water. For sockeye salmon, they spend 1 to 2 years in fresh water, then 2 to 3 years in the ocean before coming back to spawn. But they put all their energy, all their effort into the migration and spawning period. This is really the fight of their lives right now. And that fish that's just barely hovering in the current with that very worn tail and fungus spots on its skin has triumphed over the odds of the billions of salmon eggs that are laid in Bristol Bay each year. Tens of millions will come back, but only a few million are lucky enough to get back to only a few million adult salmon are lucky enough to get back to the spawning grounds. And many of those are called before they can spawn by predators like bears. So these are the most successful of the fish. And it is an incredible. Salmon are the keystone of this ecosystem. We wouldn't have bears on our cameras really at Brooks River without these fish. So if you're thankful for anything, I know in Canada you just celebrated your Thanksgiving. Or Thanksgiving in the United States is coming up in November, but if you're thankful for brown bears, you got to be thankful for salmon too. They are the group of animals that is supporting everything really that we see on the cameras. And like this bear here that just dove down right before I cut to our view, this could be perhaps number 273 here, diving for a salmon on a Riverwatch camera. And again, look at the gulls hovering around there, looking, competing, fighting for any salmon scraps. And despite that other bear hunting gulls in this spot, successfully several times over the past couple of days or so. The gulls really are not, too worried about the bear trying that. And you can see the bear diving right now. They're pretty buoyant at this time of the year. They got a lot of body fat on them. So we don't see many bears diving. We've seen it more frequently this year, especially in this spot. This has been a spot where we've seen bears consistently diving over the past month. So the water just must be deep enough that it's hard for them to reach down with their front paws and grab those fish. I'm curious enough about this spot that if I have the opportunity to go back to Brooks River next summer, if I get there, before large numbers of bears are roaming the river, I might go check that out, see how deep it is for myself, because this is an area of the river that has changed considerably over the last decade. When I first arrived at Brooks River as a ranger in 2007, there really was no flowing water through this spot. This was not a river channel at all. It was really just kind of a marshy area where there were some rivulets of water that trickled through, generally only during the seasons of high water. But this is quickly becoming the main river channel, and I think that's why we're seeing bears focus on it so much at this time of the year. As we head back up the Brooks Falls, we see what looks like maybe 812 has moved from the far side to the base of what is an old fish ladder. You can just see him in the center of the part of the screen there eating a salmon. So again, bears will change things up if one strategy doesn't work for them. Sitting in the far pool maybe wasn't successful for 812 over the past at least 50 minutes or so during the broadcast. So we moved over to the far side, found the salmon to scavenge. So again, he's sitting at the base of a fish ladder. That fish ladder was constructed in 1950 by the Bureau of Fisheries, really sort of what today would be part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This area was part of Katmai National Monument at the time, but the Bureau of Fisheries thought that, hey, the salmon needed some help getting above Brooks Falls. Salmon runs in the Bristol Bay area were much lower than they are today, actually, probably due to long-term changes in ocean productivity. So the ocean, at least for sockeye salmon in the North Pacific right now, seems to be doing pretty well to support large numbers of sockeye salmon. That's not true of a lot of other salmon species and a lot of other salmon stocks that spawn in different places in North America. But for Bristol Bay salmon, right now at least, it seems to be doing pretty well and pretty supportive of them. But that wasn't the case in the 1940s and 1950s. But right now, the fish ladder is impassable to salmon. It was blocked off several years ago. It was deteriorating. The National Park Service had been looking to block it off for several years. It wasn't being maintained, and it threatened actually to change sort of the course of the river if it eroded too badly. So they blocked it off at the top. And now it's back to the salmon migration at the river is back to what had happened historically, prior to the fish ladder being constructed. Brooks Falls emerged about 3,000 years ago or so. So salmon have been navigating the falls for several thousand years. It wasn't the barrier that it is today when it first emerged. It was probably just a trickle. It wasn't formed by an earthquake or anything like that. This ledge of rock was exposed when the level of Naknek Lake lowered as Naknek River drains through the earthen dam. That's the natural earthen dam at the west end of Naknek Lake. and that earthen dam was formed by glacial material. It's a big terminal moraine of a glacier that wandered into that area, about 30,000 years ago or so. And so we can kind of expect Naknek Lake to continue to recede as the river etches its way slowly through that material. But Brooks River really isn't going to go anywhere, folks. The falls is probably not going to get any larger. So I think we can expect to enjoy bears, and fishing at the falls and salmon at the falls for hopefully for hundreds of years, thousands of years to come. Just a few minutes left in our broadcast here. We'll go back downriver for the time being, looking at our mother and her spring cub. Just a really healthy looking spring cub on the far bank there. Like their mother, cubs are going to go into the den and this year and need to survive on their fat reserves, just like mom. So newborn cubs will nurse in the den. Brown bears are the only mammals that will give birth in hibernation, and they're the only mammals that will lactate during hibernation. But that lactation period is only for newborn cubs. So cubs will go into the den pudgy, but they'll come out pretty skinny because they're surviving on their fat reserves, just like their mother. We see bears expressing, their individuality, an ability to take advantage of opportunity in lots of places along the river, but it's also particularly evident at Brooks Falls. Different bear coming to the falls than we've seen on the cameras so far, or at least during this broadcast. And the lip of the falls, again, not at a great place to fish at this time of the year, but every once in a while a salmon may jump. And in years where we've seen larger runs of coho or silver salmon moving into the river in late summer, bears have been able to find a lot of success standing on the lip of the falls. But this is definitely a place that's much more productive during the beginning of the salmon run, the sake run in late June and July. But that doesn't mean bears don't remember, hey, this is a spot that can provide a lot of reward, so maybe I'll just give it a shot for a few minutes here. They're not really burning any extra calories right now, standing in the water, staring, at the water, than they would be if they were sitting in the forest and resting. This is a slippery spot. It does take a lot of strength to stand there. You have to really know where to position yourself. Every once in a while, a bear will fall off the falls. It's not common, but it does happen if they misstep or they slip. I've been in the water at Brooks Falls, but I've never been on the edge in that spot because I've always been too fearful of sliding off. But the bears are, they're much larger than I am. They have a lot more body mass to hold them in place. And they're also locked in with that four-wheel drive. There's four big dinner plate sized paws. So that helps them hold their position much easier and navigate the river much easier than I can. We also see bears at the waterfall. When salmon jump, the bears don't necessarily lunge. They tend to remain in place and wait for the fish just to jump close enough where they can catch it with their mouth. Occasionally, they might sort of like lean down on their arms, on their front arms there, to catch a salmon and pounce it and pin it to the river bottom. But most often they're really waiting for the fish to jump close enough so they can catch it in their mouth. And it really is an amazing display of strength. Not only just standing on the waterfall, but catching a fish in your mouth. When a sockeye salmon jumps out of the water, I mean, it's 4 to 8 pounds. So I've said this before, and I think it's a great analogy, but imagine somebody throwing a 5-pound sack of flour at your face and expecting you to catch it with your teeth. It would be extremely difficult, if not impossible for a human. But bears could do that pretty easily. So that demonstrates their size. It demonstrates their strength. The coho salmon that arrive later in the year are even bigger. They could be 8 to 12 pounds or more. So yeah, just an incredible display of strength when we see bears standing on the lip of the waterfall. And they really do make it look easy, but this is not an easy skill. It's definitely something that takes a lot of practice to get it good at. And I really do admire the bears for their persistence, for their patience, for their ability to stick it out and try to learn these different fishing positions to make a living in what is a very competitive world for them. Competitive up the falls, competitive downstream at different times of the year when when salmon are less abundant overall, and opportunities to scavenge aren't as easy to come by. It's a competitive world for those salmon under the water too. Good spawning sites are limited. So they really compete just as fiercely as the bears do, biting each other with those hooked jaws, those big teeth that they have, defending their nesting sites, defending access to their mates. Just an incredible scene of abundance and productivity at Brooks River right now. I hope everyone continues to watch the cameras over the next couple of weeks or so. I think we'll still get to see a lot of bears fishing in the river, a lot of salmon activity on the underwater camera. So look for bears to demonstrate their strength. Look for bears to demonstrate their ability to find and take advantage of opportunity. Talked about that a lot on the broadcast today, and I think it's something to look forward to as we continue to see bears prepare for winter hibernation. Thanks to Explore.org, thanks to Katmai National Park for providing this broadcast to everyone. Thanks to the camera operators for providing these views of the bears at Brooks River. Again, my name is Mike Fitz, the resident naturalist with Explore.org. I'll talk to you soon with more Bear Cam broadcasts in the near future. Have a great night, everyone.